influence on collective thought. Ultimately, the committee recommended that public opinion be controlled via a program involving espionage and official propaganda designed to discredit the issue. In this way, UFOs became a matter of national security, as the people's interest in reported UFO sightings was creating public hysteria. On the 30th of October 1938, CBS Radio broadcast an Orson Welles adaptation of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, which generated a wave of hysteria amongst the population. The show became so high profile that it was developed into a musical program, interspersed with bulletins simulating a Martian invasion near the city of Grover's Mill, New Jersey. And although the show was said to be a work of fiction, a huge number of people would tune in, just in time to hear that Earth was being attacked by extraterrestrial invaders from Mars. A state of terror-stricken panic took hold of a portion of the population, and as such, people still believe that all extraterrestrials are warmongering invaders. Another unusual incident took place, again in the United States. In the midst of World War II, on the night of the 24th of February 1942, a globe-like flying object was sighted which, according to the press, was a new Japanese weapon. The Air Force began shooting, but the powerful offensive was of no use, as the strange object appeared to resist all impact for approximately 1 hour, whilst the terrified inhabitants found themselves in the midst of a war zone. When it was over, the Navy Secretary announced that it had been a false alarm, part of a campaign aimed at causing panic amongst the population. This was a clear attempt to sweep under the rug an event so big that it could not be easily hidden. Is it possible they had the specific aim of getting people used to the existence of UFOs and that their job was to advertise the phenomena in order to instill fear in the population? Or are there extraterrestrial interventions like those that left over 30 million people in the dark, as with the famous New York blackout in November 1965? Another fact to mention is that mysterious men in black began appearing in the 1950s. They were very well dressed and wore dark glasses, and although generally courteous and inexpressive, they were also threatening, since they had ample knowledge of the eyewitness's life. The aim was to scare, neutralize and silence anything related to the UFO issue. Although initially believed to be an urban legend, in truth, these individuals would use any means possible to silence witnesses. They wore dark suits, white shirts, hats and dark sunglasses, and would drive around in cars typical of the time. They would confiscate all evidence in order to cover up the facts and use manipulation or memory-altering techniques. As a last resort, they would eliminate the witness by orchestrating an accident. These strange men in black would appear out of nowhere, and, obviously, no one knows who they actually were or if they were agents working for the shadow government, on a mission to frighten all those with evidence linked to the sighting of extraterrestrial ships. In any case, the sole reality is that these mysterious UFO sightings remain a mystery. Indeed, this is why they were called Men in Black. They would silence UFO witnesses and appear at certain times to dismantle UFO-based evidence brought forward by any number of eyewitnesses. It is also strange that these unusual figures emerged from the shadows precisely during the same years the Blue Book was being compiled. With the passing of time, anyone with evidence about UFOs and their crews came to be considered crazy, paranoid and elusive, regardless of the proof they had verifying their existence. The facts show that no extraterrestrial invasion has taken place. The sole truth is that anyone discussing evidence and solid research ends up being discredited and ridiculed. This is the case of prestigious contactees of our time who are branded as disruptive, idealistic individuals who suffer from hallucinations and end up being persecuted, mocked and reviled. Nonetheless, countless testimonies have been given over the years, including contactees who are physicians, astrophysicists, aerospace engineers, inventors, scientists, entrepreneurs and political and religious leaders, who have had the courage to face reproach from the shadow government that operates via its puppet governments in charge of discrediting the evidence. Such is the case of Canada's former defense minister, who claims that different extraterrestrial races are living amongst the population and have been collaborating with the US government for a long time. The president of Kalmykia is another case in point. This small republic was formed after the disintegration of the USSR, and it is now part of the Federation of Russia. He is a billionaire, a Buddhist and director of the International Chess Federation, and he recognizes that he has had contact with aliens. Furthermore, in the 1970s, then Prime Minister of the Caribbean island of Grenada, Sir Eric Gairy, claimed that UFOs were real and that extraterrestrials were visiting us. In order to raise public awareness, he urged the UN to create an international agency that would acknowledge and seriously investigate the issue. Nonetheless, Sir Eric Gairy would come up against the skepticism produced by his ideas. I know that flying saucers exist because I saw one 3 years ago. UN diplomats are going to think I am crazy for saying this, but I am convinced that people from outer space are studying us and that many live among us, as Earthlings. After making these pronouncements, the Prime Minister was strangely forced to resign from his post, and the United States coincidentally invaded the small Caribbean island. Renowned US astrophysicist Carl Sagan, who authored the celebrated book, Cosmos, believed that life is not a condition unique to Earth. Rather, he thought of the universe as brimming over with life. In fact, he wrote that we are all made of stardust and share a secret, cosmic, irrevocable brotherhood with the world in which we find ourselves and that surrounds us. The case of celebrated scientist Wernher von Braun is also worthy of note. In addition to discovering that the moon is hollow and vibrates like a bell when rockets or missiles were sent there, he also issued warnings about Project Bluebeam. This project is linked to the false threat of alien invasion on Earth in order to dominate humanity, which has led us to build space weapons based on the inexistent need for defense. The experience of Italian researcher Narciso Genovese, a student and associate of the eminent scientist Guglielmo Marconi, is another case in point. He formed part of a group of 98 scientists involved in the Columbus expedition. In addition to studying alternative and atomic energies, they also made contact with beings from Mars. Later, the entire group would travel to the Red Planet. Equally surprising is the case of Salvador Villanueva Medina from Mexico, who also lived through an incredible experience when, thanks to his humble nature, he traveled to the planet Venus by invitation of a group of small Venusian men. There is also the case of George Adamski, who was one of the most famous contactees ever. He presented countless UFO photographs taken in the 1940s. He was the first to relay his experiences publicly, recounting how, in the California desert in 1952, he engaged in communication with a being from the planet Venus, who gave him a message urging the termination of all nuclear weapons to avoid destruction of the planet. Despite him being faithful to his story until his death and having given numerous conferences about the issue, many scientists tried to discredit him. Another famous researcher, Enrique del Castillo, recounts that in 1973, whilst standing at the edge of a lake, he heard a noise. The place lit up for a fraction of a second. As he watched two huge ships appear in the sky, two beings would then descend and approach him. Despite being afraid, he explains how he heard a voice asking him to stay calm, before he was taken by the hand and invited to come into their ship. These beings communicated with him telepathically. He later underwent a process by which his body was cleaned. Both individuals had blonde hair, light eyes and a delicate nose and mouth. These tall people were beings from the Pleiades, and they would share incredible knowledge with him over the course of several years, warning him about the problems threatening the planet. Similarly, there is the case of US inventor and aviator George Van Tassel, who has had several extraterrestrial contacts in California's Mojave Desert. According to his account, in August 1953, he sighted a ship that remained suspended 3 meters above his head. Extraterrestrials from Venus would invite Van Tassel to enter their spaceship via an anti-gravity beam. While visiting the ship, Van Tassel received instructions on how to build a machine that would rejuvenate human cells using natural energy found in the atmosphere. It was a device they called the integratron. Van Tassel would finance the construction of the integratron, organizing UFO space conventions for 23 years, which thousands attended. Moreover, he was invited to speak at numerous universities throughout the country, lecturing on a new science. He wrote 6 books on the knowledge he received during his off-planet experiences with extraterrestrials. However, in January 1978, he announced the device was 90% finished and that he was going to try it himself. But 3 months later, he died in suspicious circumstances, apparently of a heart attack. Because Van Tassel was healthy at the time and he did not suffer any warning signs of a possible heart attack. After his death, all of his documents and plans were stolen. There is also the case of US physicist Bob Lazar, who confirms that he worked for a restricted sector of the Area 51 secret base in the Nevada desert, which is dedicated to the study of reverse engineering extraterrestrial ships. In 1989, he entered a hangar where he saw 9 flying discs of extraterrestrial origins and the bodies of several non-human beings. During interviews, he has explained how the government was trying to decipher the technology used in these ships. He even went inside one of them, and everything he saw inside was of extraterrestrial origin. Despite the many details he shared with the press, he was later discredited. And although no one believed him, over time, the data he provided has proven to be accurate. Within this context, we can also cite the famed Serbian scientist Nikola Tesla, who discovered zero-point energy and teleportation. He also published an article entitled Talking with the Planets, where he confirms having detected radio signals from other worlds. There is also the case of the famous singer John Lennon, who claimed to have witnessed a UFO sighting in Manhattan, New York in 1974. His account describes a very quiet object that made no noise whilst moving slowly from side to side. The white lights along its perimeter blinked on and off like normal bulbs, and it had a red light on top. Inspired by his sighting, John Lennon actually drew a picture of the UFO while sketching ideas for the cover of his album Walls and Bridges. In this sketch, the flying saucer he spotted over New York City bears the letters UFOER. He even mentions it in one of his songs, yet he did not discuss the incident again, for fear of being ridiculed by the establishment and the press of the day. That would not be his only sighting, however. He told a friend that on another occasion, some very powerful lights entered his room. He then saw 4 slim figures who proceeded to nudge him towards a tunnel of light. They showed him his life, as if it were a film. Then, they gave him a strange metal ball that was smooth, heavy and egg-shaped, but which he later got rid of. More striking still is that the celebrated singer was later assassinated. Like many other writers, astronauts and military personnel involved in UFO issues that enshroud unrevealed mysteries and strange disappearances. On a related note, US actor and comedian Jackie Gleason, one of the most popular stars of early television, was a friend of President Richard Nixon, with whom he shared an experience that could be the storyline for a science fiction novel. Apart from his artistic side, Gleason had another, more hidden interest. He was a great UFO enthusiast and he owned a huge library filled with books dedicated to research on this subject, which were donated to the University of Miami Library after his death. He would play golf with friend Richard Nixon and share his interest in UFOs. In fact, during a trip to Florida to help with a charity event the actor was hosting, Nixon decided to show his friend solid evidence supporting the many speculative theories in the UFO research books. During an interview with Esquire magazine, Gleason's second wife revealed that he had told her that his friend, the president, had shown him extraterrestrial bodies. According to his second wife's accounts, Gleason came home late on the night of the 19th of February 1973, and she asked him where he had been. She was surprised to see how pinched and pale her husband's face was and thought that something serious had happened. He told her that he had been to the Homestead Air Reserve Base. There, he had seen alien cadavers that were just over 1.5 meters high. They were bald and had disproportionately large ears. Gleason was very shocked by what he had seen, and believed the bodies had come from a ship that must have crashed not far from there. Richard Nixon was known as a UFO enthusiast. He always wanted to learn about the existence of extraterrestrial cadavers, and to know if it was certain that the military was truly implicated in this matter. Nixon gave his friend and aide Jackie Gleason special permission to visit the secret base in Florida. Gleason recounted that several armed soldiers escorted him to a solitary building inside the enormous base, and what he saw there left him amazed. The embalmed bodies of 4 small humanoid men lay on sheet metal. They were 70 centimeters tall, and had small heads with big ears. When he arrived home, despite being shaken by these impressions, he told his wife what he had seen, making her swear to keep it a secret. And although this is an open secret, he always refused to talk about it. Then, in 1987, he would take that secret to his grave. Nixon was not the only president with a connection to extraterrestrial issues, however. His successor to the Oval Office, Jimmy Carter, acknowledged having sighted an unidentified flying object in 1969, when he was running for governor of Georgia. Carter described the event to the National Enquirer in 1976. "I am convinced that UFOs exist, because I've seen one," he cites. "It was very peculiar looking. There were about 20 of us who saw it. It was the darndest thing I have ever seen. It was big, it was bright, it changed colors. And it was about the size of the moon. It was in view for about 10 minutes. None of us could imagine what it was. I am convinced that UFOs exist because I've seen one." During the electoral campaign that would lead him to the White House, he announced his intentions. "If I become president, I'll make every piece of information this country has about UFO sightings available to the public and scientists." To our knowledge, however, once he became president, he forgot about his promise and distanced himself from disclosure, citing defense implications as the reason behind his decision. These were not the only White House occupants who had experiences with UFOs. US President Ronald Reagan, for instance, witnessed an unidentified flying object during his term as governor of California. While traveling, the Republican leader spotted a strange luminous craft from the airplane window. It moved towards and away from the plane at very high speeds, before suddenly disappearing some time later. This experience left its mark on Reagan, and in several official speeches, he alluded to potential alien warfare. A number of years earlier, John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev had contact with beings from space. These extraterrestrials are said to have intervened to resolve the global Cuban crisis in 1963. The then US president and the Soviet leader had had a disagreement regarding the installation of Soviet missiles on the island of Cuba, which prompted the US to threaten intervention, even with the use of nuclear weapons. Despite this fact, President Kennedy and Russian Premier Khrushchev are known to have been visited by extraterrestrials, and thanks to their resourcefulness, Moscow and Washington made a pact to avoid atomic war. Kennedy's encounter took place on March 1963, at Edwards Air Force Base in California. A flying saucer landed, and two beings from other worlds descended. The next day, he would have a lengthy conversation with them. They agreed upon the deal he would make, to circumvent devastating nuclear war. What most concerns extraterrestrials who want to help humanity is to prevent the destruction caused by nuclear warfare. And that is why they often find themselves having to deactivate nuclear missiles stored in various military bases. Captain David Schindele provides an account of what took place at the Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, home to an intercontinental US missile. As he told his chain of command, he and others sighted UFOs while they watched the inexplicable shutdown of missiles. Despite this fact, they were ordered to keep quiet for the rest of their lives about what they had seen. Similarly, famed UFO researcher Stephen Bassett has confirmed that several unidentified objects easily controlled nuclear systems and have deactivated our nuclear weapons on multiple occasions. Bassett is one of the first to mention extraterrestrial interest in the threat of human military activity. But others have also addressed the same issue. In 2008, Bob Jacobs, former lieutenant of the US Air Force, made a shocking announcement about a beam of light that illuminated a nuclear warhead during missile testing in 1967. He would recount the incident during a CNN interview with the recently deceased Larry King. In 2010, a huge cylinder-shaped UFO was sighted over the Francis E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, in the state of Wyoming. This coincided with the deactivation of 50 nuclear missiles, whilst communication systems were simultaneously interrupted. Perhaps the serious potential risks involved prompted former U.S. Senator Harry Reid to mention numerous cases in which military personnel working in nuclear facilities reported seeing UFOs on site at the end of 2020. These objects' direct interference disabled launching systems, which resulted in a security crisis. In addition to the huge dangers we face due to the recklessness of governments that place the planet at risk of extinction. One of the most dramatic cases of extraterrestrial contact involves U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower's first-hand experience in 1954 at Edwards Air Force Base in South Carolina. There, he met with the extraterrestrial race known as the Nordics. They offered to give him a great deal of knowledge, in exchange for getting rid of the Greys and eliminating nuclear armament. But he refused the proposition. Later, he made a pact with the Grey race, so that they could abduct human beings, and use them for a variety of genetic experiments, in exchange for providing the United States of America with avant-garde military technology. He would ultimately sign a secret treaty with them at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. This particular event has had a huge effect on humanity, which we will discuss in depth later. It is also very striking that Pope John XXIII had several physical encounters with extraterrestrial beings as well, one of which was very unique and well documented. It took place at the Pope's summer residence at Castel Gandolfo in 1961, 2 years before his death. One of his attendees would recount details of the July evening in 1961. He states, "As we were walking through the garden, we spotted a ship overhead. It was oval-shaped and its intermittent lights were blue and amber-colored. We are referring to a flying object that flew over the heads of the Roman pontiff and his assistant before it landed on the lawn of the Pope's residence, on the southernmost side of the garden. After the craft hovered for a little while, it then smoothly landed in the garden. A strange being would emerge. Although very human-looking, he was surrounded by a golden light, and he had very long ears. Both the Pope and his assistant got down on their knees, without really understanding what they were seeing. All they knew was that this being was not from this world, and that it had to be a celestial event. After their prayer, they were very surprised to see that the strange man from the stars was still there, which proved they were not seeing a vision. The Holy Father immediately got up and walked towards the mysterious stellar being. They then had a conversation for about 15 to 20 minutes. Then, the cosmonaut turned around and returned to his ship, and without another word, took off into space. According to the assistant, the Pope never talked to him again about this experience. Yet, often, when the Holy Father went out into the garden, the assistant was certain there were UFOs in the area, since he would observe the presence of intermittent lights, which for him confirmed that the Supreme Pontiff had other contacts with beings from the stars. Some years earlier, in the 1950s, according to the testimony of a highly qualified witness, Pope Pius XII also had a related experience. A report written by Cardinal Tedeschini describes the occasion. He cites that the Supreme Pontiff appeared to be very troubled and excited. "I had never seen him like that before, and he confirmed the same. Yesterday," he said, "I saw a prodigy that has made a great impression on me. It was the 30th of October 1950, and I was taking my usual walk in the Vatican gardens, reading and studying some documents, when I was surprised by a phenomenon unlike any I have ever seen. The sun was still quite high, and it appeared to be surrounded by a luminous ring that made it impossible to stare at it at length without discomfort. The object moved in a circular motion, going from left to right, and vice versa. You could see movement inside, as if people were coming and going. I tried several times to see the globe again, in similar weather conditions, but had no such luck. It was no use, I could not see it anymore. On another note, Japanese Princess Kaoru Nakamaru has made contact with extraterrestrial beings through spiritual practices. They told her about the Earth's entry into the rings of the Sun Alcyon, explaining its photonic energy, including the changes it causes, and how we can prepare for them. There is also the experience of Japan's First Lady, Miyuki Hatoyama, wife of Japanese Prime Minister Yukio Hatoyama, who served from 2009 to 2010. In her book Most Bizarre Things I Encountered, she describes having traveled to Venus in a UFO. 66-year-old Miyuki claims her experience happened many years ago. Similarly, Prince Hans Adam II, Liechtenstein's head of state, has thought for decades that extraterrestrials regularly visit the Earth. Despite their countless articles, the national and international media have ignored the fact that Hans Adam II, Liechtenstein's head of state, has funded international UFO research for decades, fostering close ties with individuals like US entrepreneur and UFO researcher, Robert Bigelow. To our knowledge, this discreet prince has believed in UFOs and extraterrestrials for some time, but he has never made the details public. The only thing we know is that Hans Adam saw a UFO in the castle gardens when he was a little boy. The flying object disappeared behind the trees, before soaring away towards Switzerland. Ample evidence surrounds the experience of Swiss contactee Edward Billy Meyer, and news of his close encounters with beings from the Pleiades and other Pleiadian peoples have circled the globe thanks to countless photographs. Although Billy Meyer continues to be one of the greatest controversies of the global UFO community, and his stories have been discredited, however, many of his claims are supported by expert scientists who confirm that we are dealing with authentic photographs and video footage that is unmistakably real. Humanity has been denied the